My first year, I could say this really basic Chinese. I wasn't the fluent foreigner that I thought I was going to be. In fact, I was far from it. Learning Mandarin Chinese is said to be one of the hardest languages to learn, and that's for people with no hearing loss. And as a guy with severe hearing disabilities and can only speak English, I decided I was going to become fluent in Mandarin Chinese. I was born at 29 weeks, that's 11 weeks or almost 3 months earlier than most babies. The doctors gave me about a 43% chance of survival, and against the odds, I did survive. However, the medicine that saved my life also caused really severe and permanent hearing loss. In my childhood, I was like most other kids, thanks to a mix of technology, speech therapy, and of course amazing support from my parents. I did something called mainstreaming, which meant I went to a regular school. I had no idea how to do sign language, and I wasn't part of the deaf community. So although I did well at school, I wasn't like everybody else. I couldn't hear in group conversation. I had to sit at the front of the classroom to listen to the teacher. And ultimately, I was a really shy kid. However, I always had this desire to learn and be able to do new things and become really good at the stuff that I was learning. Fast forward a few more years and technology improved, my confidence grew, and my passion for learning things never dwindled. Which brings us on to learning Chinese. Chinese was a focus for me because my father is from Hong Kong, and because of the burden that my hearing loss already gives me, my parents didn't want to force a second language onto me. But this desire to learn Chinese just kept growing and growing until the age of 25, where I decided I was going to go for it, and I decided the best way to learn Chinese was to move to Taiwan. So I remember being really excited to move to another country and actually live there and be like a local. And in my mind, I thought if I'm listening to Mandarin every day and I can see all these Chinese characters everywhere, it should be easy, right? I was completely wrong. So I got a job teaching English. However, that meant that most of my days I was spent speaking English, and it didn't give me much time to study. And the longer I spent in Taiwan, the more I realized how possible it was to have very little Mandarin Chinese and still be able to live in Taiwan. So at the end of my first year, I could say this really basic Chinese. I wasn't the fluent foreigner that I thought I was going to be. In fact, I was far from it. So at this point, I decided to quit my job and just go all in. I signed up to a language school, and it was an intensive course, 3 hours every day, plus 1 or 2 hours of homework. And actually the first semester was pretty easy. I kind of built myself quite a solid foundation. I felt confident in class and I was picking up stuff really quickly. My listening wasn't as good as my speaking, and that's something I attribute towards my hearing loss. However, it wasn't so obvious right now in this first semester, especially since I had classmates who still ordered their coffee in English and they really couldn't even understand basic sentences like 你叫什么名字? So after 3 months, my Chinese looked something like this.
有时候下写我是吧会哦，我的一个上班。
So it's far from perfect, but I was addicted. I loved it. I loved being able to speak and express myself in this different language. I love the accountability of my teachers and my classmates. And I also love taking what I learned in the classroom and speaking with locals, going on dates, playing sports, making friends, buying food, just using Chinese felt awesome. So of course I signed up for another semester, ready to get straight back into it, not really realizing how much harder it was about to become. Chinese has so many sounds that just sound the same, and to my deaf British ears, it just sounded like Chinese. This is how, as a deaf person, I listen in English. My brain will listen to a sentence and it will figure out from conversation what that sentence is likely to be based on syllables and lip shape. I use lip reading. So although I can't understand what you're saying, my brain can figure those things out. So my brain can do this really, really quickly in English because it had 25 years of building this database of culture and social norms and everything that goes on on. Now, this is great in English, but for Mandarin, I've barely been learning for 3 months, and that infrastructure just wasn't there. It wasn't able to piece together the sentences and the words and the possibilities of what they could be. And the worst thing was that nobody else could relate. There were no other deaf learners, and those classmates I had that were still ordering in English had given up and gone home. Now my class was full of very capable, hardworking, multilingual students. No longer was I able to compete. Instead, I felt right to the bottom. I wasn't spending my free time going out, talking to random locals, enjoying the stuff that I'd learned. Instead, I was pretty much in tears over my homework. Every night, I would try and catch up and understand what was taught in the lessons. The stress was real, which made me, sometimes I just cried. But then again, I overcame this with English 20 years ago, so maybe it's possible I overcome it again in Chinese. It's easy to compare myself to these non-natives who have managed to become fluent in Chinese in a much shorter time than I have. However, maybe I should be comparing myself to those people who didn't have any issues and yet they gave up after 6 months. And maybe I should focus on the fact that despite the odds being against me, I still haven't given up and I've continued to push on. So to answer the question, did I become fluent in Mandarin Chinese after 5 years? That kind of depends on your definition of fluent. A better question to ask might be, did I give up learning Mandarin Chinese after 5 years? And the answer is absolutely not. I'm gonna continue pushing on. However, I'm not in the same rush to learn Chinese as I once was. I'll continue to slowly build this database of Mandarin Chinese to allow my brain to fill in the gaps that my ears cannot hear and continue with this slow marathon of learning Mandarin Chinese.